Hello folks and welcome back. Now today we'll be talking about the Saluda Grade. Now, what is the Saluda Grade, you might be asking yourself? Well, it is a steep railway grade that runs through the town of Saluda. It's a 4, almost 5% grade, and of course it varies in different areas that goes through the town of Saluda. It is the steepest mainline railroad grade in the United States of America. And needless to say, a steep railroad grade with heavy trains makes a very dangerous railroad grade. We'll get to that in a little bit. So stay tuned for train wrecks. Yes. Anyway, so the grade was built in the 1870s for the Asheville and Spartanburg Railway, which would later on become the Southern Railway and would eventually become the Norfolk and Southern. Anyway, so the railroad was built to a average of 4.2%. It touches 4.7%, but it's got an average of 4.2%. The grade itself is 2.8 miles long. So, to put this simply, this grade is incredibly steep. For a narrow gauge railway where the trains are shorter, this isn't as big of a deal since they designed everything to deal with 4 and 5% grades. For a mainline railroad grade, this is where it's significant. This grade was a mainline railroad grade, which meant long quarter-mile long freight trains were going up this grade. The problem was you either took a quarter-mile long freight train up a hill and you stalled, you put a bunch of helpers on it and you still stalled, or you took the train and you broke it up into thirds in some situations, possibly even into quarters or fifths, and you put helpers on the train and brought the train up in sections, which is basically the only way they could do it. Either way, it required them to stop at the bottom of the grade just to get up it. And the problem with going up and down this grade was it took so much time, because if you brought it up in sections, you had to bring it up piece by piece. Not to mention that the railroad grade had a speed limit of 12 miles an hour, which basically meant they were crawling. Why was there a 12-mile-an-hour speed limit? Well, because there was problems when you're coming back down the grade. Within places, a 4.7% grade, trains are heavy. Gravity pushes down on things when they go down a hill. So as you can imagine, there are many instances of horrific train wrecks on this grade coming down the hill. And as a matter of fact, the man that designed the runaway tracks that are designed to save the runaway trains from running away down the Saluda Grade was a railroad engineer for the West Asheville Railway. He was a steam locomotive engineer, not a civil engineer. And he actually designed the runaway tracks during a stay at the hospital. And the stay at the hospital, yes, I bet you guessed it, was actually inflicted by the fact that he was the engineer on a train that ran away down the Saluda Grade, and he acquired many injuries on this accident. Anyway, while in the hospital, he designed the runaway tracks. His thought process was, if gravity's the problem, we're gonna make gravity fix it. So now you're probably wondering what a runaway track is. Well, it's actually quite simple. A runaway track is literally just a track that is designed to save the train in the case of a runaway. So, see these rusty rails? Those are the runaway track. This little white house with the guy standing next to it, that is a switchman's house. If the train's coming down the grade and they're at a controlled speed and the engineer's like, we got this, so we'll just keep on trucking, he will give a horn signal or a whistle signal to the switchman to set the switch for the normalized direction, which will continue on down the main line. These points are always set if a train's coming down the grade for the runaway track, so that if they were to run away, the engineer would not send a horn signal. The switchman would probably see the train coming down the hill at a high rate of speed and run away. At least that's what I would do. And the train is sent down the runaway track, and what that does is it sends the train up an even steeper grade than the Saluda Grade and tries to slow the train down and bring it to a more controlled stop. Again, if you're taking the runaway track, you're probably still scared to death, but it is a safer situation than sending a runaway train down the main line and just hoping it slows down at some point. Sending it up the runaway track is significantly safer. Again, not perfect, but going down a 4.7% grade is also not perfect. So this is actually a pretty clever way of making something that's very dangerous become a little less dangerous. And then they would have two of these runaway tracks. This, I believe, is the one at the bottom of the grade. I am not 100% sure on that, but there is two of them. So there's one at the bottom, and then there's one at the halfway-ish point, so that they can put the train back up a hill again at one of those 2 points. And again, they control those switches with whistle signals to the switchman, and it makes it significantly safer. It was quite a good idea. Unfortunately, though, it did come from a hospital visit from another engineer. But as you can see, this is definitely a problem. Even under good circumstances, you could see the brake smoke from those cars. This leads you to another problem. All those brake pads getting ripped to shreds coming down this hill probably added up a fair bit of maintenance costs for constantly maintaining these locomotives. The other problem with the Saluda Grade was getting up the grade. Getting up the grade, like I said earlier, required extra locomotives, or taking the train in sections and taking parts of the train up the hill at once. During the steam era, this did seem to be a bigger problem than it was in the diesel era. In the diesel era, they just seemed to take the train up in sections, but in the steam era, the Southern Railway actually purchased locomotives specifically for the grade. These are USRA 2882 Malley type locomotives. Actually, they might be simple articulated. I'm not quite sure. They're USRA designs though. I think they're Malleys. Yeah, they're not simple articulated. The front cylinders look bigger. So they're Malleys, and they were specifically stationed at the bottom of the Saluda Grade to push long freight trains up the hill. The other solution they had was having multiple 210-2 locomotives at the base of the grade that would help push locomotives up. As you can see, this is a passenger train, and you can see either one of those two locomotives I just mentioned as a helper locomotive helping push a short passenger train up. You can see the plume of smoke behind this one. Again, helper locomotives were very important. And now, as you can imagine, owning more locomotives meant that you had to be able to maintain and fuel more locomotives. And not to mention, more locomotives just cost more money because you got to buy more locomotives. So this is very costly to bring a train up the Saluda Grade. And as you can imagine, that was one of the problems of the steam era. And steam engines, by the way, don't like grades as much as diesels do. That was one of the problems. Now, the diesel era did solve some things. However, there was a problem. When the diesel era rolled around, they did find a alternative route to the Saluda Grade, which basically just bypassed it with a much more gradual grade on a 4.7% grade, and the traffic on the Saluda Grade began to decline. However, there were still trains going over it during the early diesel era, which just required diesel locomotives to take the train up in sections. So, not quite as cool as the steam era where you saw 3 or 4 steam engines just absolutely working to get a train up the hill, and it's probably only part of a train. The diesel era was significantly more boring. However, unfortunately, the reroute for the Saluda Grade, the more gradual gradient, would eventually be the thing that ultimately killed the Saluda Grade. Now, late last year, the Saluda Grade Rail Trail purchased the Saluda Grade for about $28 million. Now, though the grade itself is not 28 miles long, the whole railroad stretch is about 28 miles. However, the grade's only about 3. Or I think it's 2.7 miles. Anyway, they plan on converting it into a trail. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't really plan on riding a bike for 27 miles on dirt. And I also don't really plan on riding a bike up a 4, almost 5% grade through Saluda. That just doesn't sound appealing. I don't really plan on doing it. I don't know about you, but that sounds like a lot of work, and I'm kind of lazy. I ain't gonna do that. So the Saluda Grade rail trail is underway, but yet not. One of the reasons why we think that they haven't broke ground, from what we've heard, is that because the Norfolk Southern Railway modernized the Saluda Grade and put 130 pound per foot rails down. Now, that's 130 pounds doesn't sound like a lot, but when you consider there's hundreds of thousands of feet making up that railway, times 2, that's a lot of weight. And the railroad is going to be an absolute pain in the butt for them to tear up, because the rail is so heavy, and not very many machines can move that. So either A, you buy big machines to tear up the rails, or you hire someone to go through and cut the rails into smaller, more manageable pieces, which would probably take you weeks, since there's 29 something miles of track. Yeah. So unfortunately, unless any of you have $28 million sitting in your back pocket that you plan on throwing in a fire this afternoon, yeah, no one's going to be saving the railroad anytime soon. Now, in a perfect world, this would be my vision for it. Obviously, you'd want to run steam trains, because what's a railroad without a steam train? Exactly. And you would basically run as a tourist railway, a couple trains a day, and you'd, of course, do your photo charters and all that. But I think it would also be cool to incorporate the rail trail as part of the railroad, maybe having a rail trail off to the side of the railroad a bit, make it kind of cool for maybe rail fans that want to come out and photograph the trains as they go by. And they can have those trails, they can walk or ride their bikes up and get different vantage points along the railroad. That would be kind of neat. Maybe it cause more problems. It'd probably cause more problems than it'd be worth dealing with, but I think it would be super cool. Let me know down in the comment section, what do you all think? I don't know, I think it'd be cool if the railroad stayed a tourist railroad. I think it'd be better for the towns than the rail trail, because the whole idea is they're trying to attract more tourism. But I figure the rail trail is not going to attract near as many people in a year as the train can attract in a week. So I'm not quite sure. But let me know down in the comment section, what do y'all think? Anyway, folks, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Who knows, maybe one day the Saluda Grade will be saved, but right now we're not quite sure. At the moment it looks to be becoming a rail trail. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please like, subscribe, share this video with your friends and family, and as always folks, see you on the rails.